When I was 25, I decided to take a solo trip to Rio de Janeiro. My plan was to spend an entire month soaking in the sights, enjoying the food, and experiencing the culture. I had booked an Airbnb located in a fairly quiet neighborhood, far from the busy tourist areas, thinking it would give me a more authentic feel of the city. The host seemed polite, middle-aged, and professional. On my first day, I explored Rio, came back late at night, and went straight to sleep. On the second night, I was lying in bed scrolling on my phone when I caught the faint sound of footsteps coming from above. The listing had clearly stated that the apartment was an independent unit, so no one was supposed to be living upstairs. I dismissed it as either the building settling or noise from another nearby unit. But over the next few days, the footsteps returned almost every night, always around the same time, 11 p.m. sharp. Eventually, curiosity got the best of me. One evening, I went upstairs to investigate. That's when I noticed a locked door at the top of the stairs, one I hadn't paid attention to before. I pressed my ear to it and could hear someone moving around inside. My instincts told me to leave it alone, so I went back downstairs, convincing myself it was just the host storing some belongings. About a week later, I came back home earlier than usual and again heard movement upstairs. This time, the sound was followed by quiet footsteps descending the stairs. I froze where I stood. The door to my apartment creaked open just enough for me to see a man's face peeking in before he quickly slammed it shut and ran back upstairs. My heart was pounding as I grabbed my phone and called the host. He claimed it was only a cleaner who had come at the wrong time. But there was something unsettling about the way he said it. That night, I pushed a chair against my door and barely slept. By morning, I had packed my bags and checked into a hotel. The following day, I flew home, and I have never returned to Brazil since. It was the holiday season, and most of my friends were out of town. To keep myself busy, I decided to look for a part-time job. I eventually landed one at a small, family-owned restaurant in town. It wasn't particularly busy, and the owners were kind and welcoming. One night, a man came in alone and sat at a table in my section. He looked to be in his late 40s or early 50s, with a scruffy beard and worn, faded clothes. From the moment I greeted him, he fixed me with an unsettling stare, as if he was studying my every move. He barely touched his food, spending more time watching me than eating. Every time I glanced his way, he'd give me this slow, knowing smile that sent a shiver down my spine. When he finished his meal, he left a generous tip along with a note that read, "You have a beautiful smile. I'd love to see it again." I crumpled it up and threw it away, trying to shake off the discomfort. But over the next week, he came in almost every single night. He always sat in my section, and he always stared. One evening after closing, I spotted him standing outside across the street, watching us lock up. Uneasy, I asked a coworker to walk home with me. But the following night, I made the mistake of leaving alone. Halfway home, I felt it. That creeping, prickling sensation of being followed. I glanced over my shoulder, and there he was, trailing just far enough behind. I quickened my pace, and so did he. My heart was hammering in my chest. I suddenly veered into a brightly lit gas station, pretending to browse. He stopped just outside and waited. The clerk noticed my panic. When I explained the situation, he immediately offered to call the police. But by the time they arrived, the man was gone. I never saw him again. But I never went back to that restaurant either. The thought that he could still be out there, waiting, was enough to keep me away. When I was 19 and strapped for cash, I picked up a second job as a waitress at a diner on the outskirts of town. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. The night shift was usually quiet, a few regulars and the occasional trucker passing through. One evening, a man walked in and took a seat at the counter. He looked to be in his 30s, clean-cut, casually dressed, and at first seemed polite. He introduced himself as Trevor and struck up some small talk. But soon, his questions grew more personal, asking where I lived, if I lived alone, and what time I finished work. I avoided most of them, keeping my answers vague and professional. Over the next couple of weeks, Trevor started showing up more often, always during my shift. Sometimes he wouldn't even order food, just a coffee, and then sit there for hours. One night, while I was cleaning tables, I noticed he'd left a napkin with my name written on it, and a small heart drawn beside it. It sent a wave of unease through me, but I tried not to jump to conclusions. Then, things escalated. I began finding small gifts in my locker: flowers, candy, even a scarf. The problem was, only staff had access to those lockers. That meant Trevor had somehow gotten into the back. That's when I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore and went straight to my manager. My manager promised to keep watch and even offered to walk me to my car after shifts. But a few nights later, as I left work, I saw Trevor leaning casually against my car. He smiled and said he'd been waiting to give me a ride home. I refused, but he stepped closer, blocking my door. My manager came out at that exact moment, confronting him and telling him to leave. The next day, I found a note tucked under my windshield wiper. "You shouldn't have embarrassed me." That was the final straw. I filed a police report and quit the job just days later. It remains the first and only true stalker I've ever had to deal with.